Good morning. I'm on porridge jankers again. Let me just put this light on, a bit dark. I just got back from walking the dog. It's pouring with rain, I'm soaking wet. Just changed my trousers. Never mind. But yeah, I'm still on this spirituality thing. And I'm thinking right now about the relationship between spirituality and certainty. I should stress, by the way, I don't think any of these ideas I'm coming up with are necessarily any good. And I certainly don't think any of them are kind of total solutions. You know, as when I think about spirituality in my own head, you know, thinking, you know, what do I mean when I use that word? Or when I just kind of monitor what I'm doing by looking back at my videos and think, oh, I've used that word in that kind of way. Or I seem to be referring to something like that. What I'm doing there is I think I've got lots of different things going on. You know what I mean? I think probably we all have. It isn't a single understanding, is it? You know what I mean? Or there's lots of different ways into it, approaches to the idea. As I say, what I'm thinking of right now is certainty in relation to it. And so I think one of the things, and this kind of relates to what I was talking about yesterday in relation to kind of dissolution of boundaries and flow and those kind of metaphors, is to do with you know, what happens when we become certain of something. Because it seems to me that if spirituality is about anything, it's not about certainty. Which is a bit odd, I know, because a lot of religious folk, particularly kind of fundamentalist religions, seem very, very certain indeed. I had a conversation with Ryan Campbell a while back. Remember Ryan Campbell? I wonder what happened to him. Ryan Campbell a while back, and I made a really outrageous claim. Actually. I just said I was more spiritual than he was. But what I meant by that was that he as a kind of representative of a certain kind of fundamentalist mindset, to me didn't seem very spiritual from the understanding that I'm bringing to that. Because as I say, spirituality doesn't seem to be about certainty. It seems to be, and I'm going to just put this out there, see what you think. It seems to me that spirituality is what exists on the other side of certainty. On the other side of certainty. Because you start out by knowing very little, don't you? And this is not an all babies or atheists conversation. But whatever you're doing, you start out knowing very little about any subject or about life itself. And then you gain in knowledge. And as you gain in knowledge, for me at least, you kind of gain in certainty. You know, the more you know about something, for a while at least, the more certain you feel about it. You feel like you've got it, you know. But what I find, and I don't think this is unique to myself, is at a certain point, if you keep looking at something, you keep finding out about things, that you kind of have to move past that point of certainty. Because the more you find out, the more anomalies there are, the more limitations you come across in your understanding. So, and I'm talking about this both from an academic point of view and, as I say, a more metaphysical, spiritual point of view. Certainly in terms of academic learning. You feel, you learn stuff and you feel you know something. But if you keep studying the subject, whatever it is, at a certain point you have to kind of let go of that feeling and not rely on it as any kind of evidence of anything, really. It's something lies on the other side of it. Wisdom lies on the other side of it, perhaps, or something like that. And maybe the same is true of spirituality. And I suppose here I'm thinking of a couple of things in relation to some stuff I've read and talked about recently. One is this quotation I came across from Sri Aurobindo, where he's talking about the intermediate zone. And he's saying in there that on any kind of spiritual path, he says, quite often you'll come to a phase where you think you've cracked it. You know, you feel illuminated. The world, the scales fall from your eyes, and you feel enlightened. You know, you feel like you've cracked it. A feeling of certainty, and the temptation is to stop there. You know, to build that, have that feeling as the foundation, in the way that certainty is a foundational feeling, and to stay there. But Aurobindo and other kind of spiritual people who take this approach say that's not the place to stop. That's the intermediate zone, and real spirituality, you have to let go of that. I think elsewhere there's a guy called Trungpa. He's a Buddhist. He writes about spiritual materialism, and he's kind of writing about the same thing. He's really critiquing people who kind of try to acquire spiritual enlightenment as a product, as almost like a life-enhancing, you know, accoutrement to their life, almost like an accessory. And you acquire that. And he says in his Trungpa in talking about spiritual materialism, he's kind of talking about it in the same way that Aurobindo is talking about the intermediate zone. That you stop there because you've got what you want, or you feel enlightened, or you feel you've arrived, or you feel like you've suddenly got this wealth of spirituality, so you're kind of having a kind of materialist take on it. But again, you know, Trungpa, writing about Buddhism, this is Tibetan Buddhism he's talking about, again says that feeling of that quest for spiritual material isn't a spiritual quest. And if you achieve that point and you do feel yourself all enlightened and enriched by it, then you've stopped too soon. You haven't got the spiritual goods, because there isn't any spiritual goods. You have to put those down and move on without them. It's kind of chapel perilous experience if you want to switch spiritual metaphors halfway through. And I suppose the other thing that this reminds me of is, what's he called? Aleister Crowley, or Crowley, I think he wanted himself to be pronounced. Aleister Crowley, and one of his essays, I'm sure you'll know Aleister Crowley is like an alchemist, magician guy, mountaineer as well. But he wrote a short essay called The Soldier and the Hunchback. And what he means by the soldier and the hunchback, he means the exclamation mark, the soldier, and the hunchback is the question mark. And he says, and he's basically saying that every time you come across an exclamation mark, that feeling of eureka, I have it, exclamation mark, then you should always look for the hunchback standing behind the soldier. You should always look for the question that stands behind the answer that you feel has given you what you need. Because there's always an answer, a question behind every answer. And what I think he's suggesting there is that it's not the question that's important, in a sense, in terms of a spirituality. You don't arrive at the final exclamation mark. Spirituality, in that sense, is the recognition that it's constantly soldier, hunchback, and you have to kind of embrace that oscillation between arriving and setting off all the time. There's no stable place to stand in that kind of place that lies always beyond the certainty that answers provide. So yeah, I mean, the reason why I think this kind of relates to porridge is done, so I have to stop. Look at the steam, look. I think the word qi in Chinese philosophy means that, doesn't it? Steam. Anyway, the last thing is just I wanted to think about that in relation to or try and relate it to the thing I talked about in my previous one, which is to do with substances, because there is a connection between these things. I think these things kind of correspond or form networks of correspondence at a metaphorical level, which is the level that our mind thinks at a large part of the time. And this is to do with solidity. You know, certainty, that feeling of certainty, feeling of knowing, is associated with solid, hard objects, which is what we call firm knowledge, or hard knowledge, or rock solid certainty. You know, these are the kind of ways we understand it, and it's always associated with fixity and with lowness, foundations, fundamental places on which to build, perhaps. So certainty in that sense, I think, corresponds on a cognitively poetic level to the soldier in that little train of little parade that Crowley talks about. And I think it also perhaps corresponds to the intermediate zone, the place where you stop and plant roots and stay still and, you know, have that kind of rock solid conviction that you're in the right place and all the lights are lit for you and you alone, and has that solidity of the material that you might possess if you're a spiritual materialist in Trungpa. And as opposed to spirituality, you know, which, as I said before, maybe correlates to something like a more fluid metaphor, maybe a volatile liquid which dissolves boundaries and is constantly in motion, turning like a soap bubble, like colours in a soap bubble, maybe like that. And that's not certain, it's not fixed, it's not hard, it flows, you know, and it's constantly leaking out of every moment of certainty, every all the soldiers are incontinent and they're always leaking into the hunchback behind, or something. Anyway, I hope that makes some kind of sense. I'll try and pursue these further. Any comments? Like, rate, subscribe. Remember that, like, rate, subscribe. Don't do that, any of those things. But comments and responses are welcome. Thanks very much. Bye.